Good evening and welcome to our first Visiting Scholars session of the fall 2020 semester. I'm Lindsay Peralt. I'll be your moderator this evening, and I am very excited to introduce you to Tasia A. Jones, actor, director, and theater educator. Welcome, Tasia.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive in, we have a lot to cover. I want to briefly introduce the Visiting Scholars program itself. This endeavor is a partnership between Purdue Honors College, other campus organizations, and other colleges to bring thought leaders, creative visionaries, and people who are making great strides in their various disciplines to come to campus and engage with students, or do this virtually as we are doing here today. So we consequently want to offer a big thank you to the Purdue Theater Department for making today possible. So Tasia is not only directing an upcoming play at Purdue titled In the Blood, she is also teaching a class centered on the essays of the playwright behind it. So can you talk to us a little bit about your work here at Purdue?
Yeah, so, initially, the production that I am directing was going to be happening this fall. And when it became clear that that couldn't happen in the fall as planned, we moved that production to the spring and decided to do this engagement with the students who were cast in the production around the work of Susan Laurie Parks, who is the playwright of In the Blood. So this sort of hybrid class / production that's happening online is really focused on investigating the red letter plays by Susan Laurie Parks, which includes In the Blood, and some of her essays and just her writing style. So the cast members of the production are getting a deep dive into the work of this playwright. And it's really going to hopefully enrich the production that they put on in the spring.
Now that brings us to a question that we'll be asking all of our visiting scholars to kind of unite these sessions. It's about mentorship and the importance of collaborative, interdisciplinary thinking and building on the work of others. We were curious, if you look back on your career, who do you think has been most instrumental in shaping you and in putting you where you are today?
That's a good question. I mean, I've certainly looked up to a lot of different artists throughout my career and before I even started my career. So for acting, and performance, I really have always been a big fan of Phylicia Rashad, who's an actress who was on The Cosby Show, if anyone remembers, and is also a director in her own right. And I actually was able to assist to direct for a production that she was directing at Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago. And so that was kind of a dream of mine. I got to work with one of my artistic idols, which was really exciting. And then as far as mentorship goes, I've had a great mentor in playwright Lydia Diamond for the last 15 years. She taught at my alma mater, Boston University, which is where I met her. And since then, we have been friends and colleagues, and she's really supported me throughout my artistic life.
So let's go back briefly to In the Blood. You touched on the fact that this is kind of a modern riff on the Scarlet Letter. Can you tell us more about the storyline?
Yeah, without giving too much away, because I hope everyone comes to see the production.
Yeah, of course.
The play uses some of the storyline of the Scarlet Letter, but it's very, very much inspired by, right, or an adaptation. This is not Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, right? This is the character, the main character has the same name, Hester, and she is a mother of 5 children, and she is a woman who is basically living on the street with her 5 children. She lives under a bridge, and we see her throughout the play being taken advantage of by other people around her. She's really just trying to do the best she can for her children and to make a life for herself and to get a leg up, as she calls it in the play. She's always looking for her leg up. And that's exceedingly difficult in the world that she lives in. And we have these other characters who kind of represent the system of the world that she lives in, which is this capitalist system. and they're really holding her back from achieving her potential. And we see that kind of how she deals with that throughout the play.
Now, based off your description, I haven't seen the play myself yet, can't wait to see it, but it does not sound like it's the kind of material that will be easy for audiences to watch. It will really challenge them. So as a director, what do you hope people walk away after they have that experience?
Well, I hope, with any work that I am directing, my goal is always to shift perspective, right? So I hope that the audience comes away with a new understanding, empathy, and a shift in their perspective, right? To see a woman who is struggling to make ends meet and to provide for her family, and to have some empathy for her situation and for her and her children. Because, though this is a play and these characters are fictional, there are many people dealing with similar struggles in our world today.
I'm curious, as a director and also for the actors who work on that type of material, does it change you as well?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I am a deeply empathetic person, and so everything I work on, I feel deeply impacted by. And so I've been really trying to develop a way of working with actors that allows them to also express the emotions and the thoughts that they have around the material that they're working on. And so we'll be doing a little bit of that in this class that I'm teaching at Purdue, and in the rehearsals of the production itself. It's really about how do we as people first, before we put on the hats of actors and directors, how do we as people encounter this content, and how do we, manage and process our own feelings around it?
Now, this just reminded me that we did not talk about your biography and your resume, and I really want to cover that because it is impressive. So Tasia is the Artistic Fellow at Northlight Theater. She holds an MFA from Northwestern and earned her BFA from Boston University. Her recent directing credits include Intimate Apparel, Small Mouth Sounds, Voyeurs de Venus, and White. She has appeared on stage in works such as Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, Good Television, Grimm, and The Bluest Eye, and she is an artistic associate with the Black Lives, Black Words Project. So that gives you a sense of her body of work. And that brings me to another question, because when we look at everything you've done, one could call it brave. It is bold. What gives you the courage to tackle challenging topics and subject matter that is sometimes socially and culturally charged?
I mean, I have always wanted to do something with art, right? And when I say do something, I mean more than entertain. I have always wanted to find a way to create positive social change, and through theater, I found a way to do that. And so I gravitate towards, this kind of material that is, as you say, charged or, challenging sometimes for audiences, but always socially relevant, right? So I'm always looking for what is the most socially relevant material, and what are the questions that we need to be asking as a society, and how can this play or theatrical event ask those questions and invite audiences to, think and consider and come up with their own answers.
I think you're kind of getting at this next question here, but we were curious about your take on, if we look at theater at its root, what is theater for? What is its mission and purpose?
Theater is storytelling, and it's as old as time. We've, as old as human beings have been around, right? We've been telling stories. And I think, part of that is about connection. It's about community. And it's also about, empathy. It's about cultivating empathy within ourselves and within our peers, right? And so I think that is the real gift that theater can give, is that it gives people an opportunity to experience, stories and worldviews that may not be their own, that they may not be familiar with, and to cultivate some empathy around those different perspectives.
Now, talking about that, I want to address two projects that you've worked on recently. The first is Intimate Apparel, because it feels like there's a lot of connection between that show and current events and what we're talking about. Can you explain for our audience a little bit about Intimate Apparel and the storyline and how you see it potentially intersecting with current events?
So it's really interesting because I directed Intimate Apparel at Northlight Theater, which is just north of Chicago. And I'm directing it again at Utah Shakespeare Festival in about, a little less than a year. So in July of 2021, that will be going up. And I'm directing this play again, and it feels different, because this time I have a real eye on what's happening now, and not to say that I didn't in the first production, but I'm really interested this time in how does this play really connect to our present moment. And I had an interview with Lynn Nottage, who's the playwright of Intimate Apparel, and I spoke with her about how in the play we have this woman, Esther Mills, who is a Black seamstress in 1905 Manhattan, and she is really trying to do whatever she can to make her dreams come true. And she sews intimate apparel for various clients across the city, and she's saving all of her money so that she can one day open a beauty shop. And so she has all of these dreams, and the people around her have dreams of their own, but they've all put their dreams to the side because they don't think it's possible. And yet Esther has this hope, and it's an infectious hope, as I like to call it, because each character that encounters her and interacts with her starts to pick up a little bit of that hope. And I think hope is something we really need right now in our present moment. Our world, feels a little bit like it's crumbling around us sometimes. And there's so much violence and injustice. And we are also confronted with our own mortality right now as we face this pandemic. And so the play for me right now, as I think about this woman from, the past, from 1905, this Black woman and what she dreamed and who she loved and how she, how she cultivated a life for herself. I think about the people who are doing the same thing right now, right? And I think about, Black men and women who have been killed, who had dreams and loved and, tried to create futures and lives for themselves, and how much their stories matter, right? And Esther's life in Intimate Apparel is just one slice of that, right? Here is a person that without this play, we would not know her story, right? She is a nameless figure, right? A nameless picture that we might see in a bin of photographs, right? But this play allows us to look inside her life a little bit and get a picture of why she mattered, right? Because she does matter, and we all do.
And it sounds very reminiscent of the Say Her Name, Say His Name campaigns.
Exactly. I mean, I like to make that connection because at the end of the play, in Intimate Apparel, we have an image, right? And it just says, it's captioned, unidentified Negro seamstress. But we know her name after watching the play. Her name is Esther Mills, and she loved and she dreamed and she made beautiful things. And so my hope is that, we can evoke that, say her name, right? And get a little bit of insight into, each person has a story to tell. And each person's story is worthy of telling.
That brings me to the other piece of work that you've been involved with that seems very relevant. And this one is inside. And I found this particularly interesting because not only of the subject matter, but the way it was created. Can you tell us a bit about the evolution of the inside?
Yeah, so The Inside is a play that was originally written by uh, my mentor that I was just speaking about, Lydia Diamond, who is, a very accomplished playwright, has had plays on Broadway, writes for television currently, has a play that was just off Broadway, Tony Stone, which everyone should check out. I'm sure it's going to have another production soon. And she wrote this play for herself when she was actually an undergrad at Northwestern University. And she gifted it to me when I was an undergrad at Boston University in my senior year, and looking for something, to really dig into as a performer, because I didn't feel like I'd had those opportunities up to that point in my undergrad experience. And she gave me this solo show, and I performed it, and it was a huge gift for me to be able to perform that play and put my own words into it. I rewrote it with her and put my own stories into it. And so it really evolved from there. And I decided that when the time was right, I would gift this play to another young Black female performer, or a woman of color. And so when I was at Northwestern getting my MFA, I met an actress and playwright named Amira Danan. And I knew right away that the play was hers, and that she was the next person to pass it on to. And so that's what we've done. I've passed this play on to Amira, and we rewrote it again. And so now her stories are in there. She has beautiful poetry that she's added into it. And it's this paying it forward kind of play. And so the hope is that one day, hopefully it won't be necessary, right? Because the play is about what it is to feel on the outside, and to want to be on the inside, and not feel like you really fit anywhere. So hopefully it won't be necessary, but my guess is that it will, that she will one day pass it on to the next person that she feels this story needs to be shared with.
When you talk about feeling on the outside, on college campuses, we like to think that we are in an incredibly diverse setting, but that wasn't exactly your experience in undergrad. It wasn't exactly that way in master's program. Can you characterize what you experienced for us?
As an undergrad?
Yeah, and as you went on.
Yeah. When I was at BU, which is a great theater school, it's a conservatory style training program. I was really excited, to be learning about performance, but I was in the theater arts track. So I was also learning about playwriting and directing. So I had all of these interests. But, as a performer, it was tough because there were only a couple of Black women in the program at the time, and there weren't a lot of roles, for us. And so there weren't a lot of acting opportunities, right? And so I was kind of always in the ensemble, or, a side character. And that's why the inside was so important for me, because I finally got to really perform. But it really encouraged me to be a mentor as well, and to, as much as I could as an artist, provide more opportunities for actors of color, specifically Black women like myself, who, there just weren't a lot of opportunities. And so I'm, looking for those plays and looking for those roles that I can say, like, who's the next person that, needs something that they can bite into, and is just waiting for an opportunity to show what they can do. And so, throughout my career, I've looked for that, and I've looked for opportunities to mentor as well.
That's fantastic. So when you were working on the inside, it gets deeply personal. What does it feel like to put so much of yourself into a character?
It was tough at first. It was, it's very vulnerable, especially knowing that people are going to watch it and probably be like thinking, oh, is that true? Or is that, is that made up? And it's a combination because the play, as it is now, especially, is really three different women's stories combined, as well as fictional elements. It's not all autobiographical. Um, so it's very vulnerable, to invest so much of yourself into a piece, but it's also very cathartic to perform that and to speak your truth on stage and have people hear it and lean in and listen, and understand.
As we move on, I do want to mention that we'll be taking audience questions in a little bit. So if you have something you want to ask Tasia, please chime in and let us know. One of the questions a lot of Purdue students had for you is they wanted to know about your background. When were you first exposed to theater? When did you know that this might be for you?
When was I first exposed to theater? I was certainly exposed to performance very early. I was a huge fan of Whitney Houston, and and I wanted to be a singer when I was very little. Yeah, that sort of kind of morphed into wanting to be an actor, and I think first theater experience was I think in fourth grade. We did a play about recycling in fourth grade, and I played a deer whose antlers got stuck in a plastic bag or something, and it was the first time I had performed in any way on stage with an audience, and it was just like, I don't know, so I just caught the bug. There was something about that exchange of energy, with an audience that was addictive, and so I continued from there. But my parents also tried to expose me to as much of the arts as possible. I remember going to see Alvin Ailey perform, and when The Color Purple came out, I went and saw that, and I think Miss Saigon. There were all of these plays, that my mother especially tried to take us to, and make sure that we were exposed to the arts.
Now, the acting world, directing, it's tough. You end up facing a lot of rejection in that field. How did you develop the resiliency that you needed to push through and make this your career?
Well, one, I kind of took a break from acting and focused on directing, which a lot less rejection, I'll say. It was hard as a performer, that dealing with that rejection, but you get used to it because it just becomes a part of the job, right? Is you audition and you audition and you audition, and sometimes you get a break and you book a commercial and it's awesome, and sometimes you're just auditioning for a really long time and not booking anything. And so I really had to learn how to compartmentalize, my audition versus not getting the role, right? And that it wasn't about me. And I think when I started directing, I really understood it more, because as a director, when I have to cast a play, I want everyone to be amazing. And I want everyone who walks in the room to be the person I'm looking for, But sometimes it comes down to like things that are completely out of the actor's control, right? Which is about like how actors are pairing with one another, and what is the story we're trying to tell, and what are the needs of the play. So I really stopped taking it personally, because I knew that it wasn't personal, right? They were just looking for exactly who they needed, and I just wasn't that person that time.
Mm-hmm. As an artist who has kind of done it all, do you have a preference between acting, directing, or writing? What is your favorite?
I try not to say I have a favorite, but I'm really enjoying directing right now. I get to make a lot of choices and decisions about what the world of the play looks like and feels like, and I get to have a real impact in, how the audience is going to experience the entire thing. I'm really enjoying that. And I'm also just really enjoying working with designers, and collaborating in that way to tell a story. But I miss performing sometimes because I haven't done it in a little while now. I haven't been doing it for the last 4 years since I was focused on getting my MFA. And I do miss it because there's a certain something, when you're on that stage and there's an audience looking back at you and you can feel that energy transfer. There's really nothing like it.
Now, that brings me back to the inside, because as any creative gets a little bit attached to their work, and you want to hold on to that, whether you're acting or directing. How did it feel to kind of let the reins loose and let someone take it over?
Yeah, I was speaking to Amira about this the other day, I think, and Lydia too. Lydia will say that it was agonizing to give it away at first, right? And I felt the same. It's hard to like watch someone want to change things that you've written, and or say, we should cut this story so that we can add this, and it's like, oh, you're killing my darlings. But there was a higher purpose, right, for the play, and it was really beautiful to watch Amira put her mark on it, and make it better, and I really feel like that's true, is that each person that adds themselves to it, it just gets better, because it gets more complex and it gets more full. And there's all of these things that I could never have added because they're not of my experience. They weren't my truth, but they're hers. And so now there's this wonderful blending of those stories and those truths, that are creating a new character. So it's not, it's hard in the beginning, but but it's actually really great.
And it's probably fabulous to see another artist blossom with the work
Yes.
you've worked on. So we are getting some fantastic audience questions in here. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for them. So the first question from our audience, this person wants to know, In the Blood was first produced in 1999, revived a few years ago. What differences do you see in staging the play then versus now? Or are circumstances and contexts at play here?
Yeah, I've never seen, and I didn't see the original production, so I couldn't tell you, really what's different. But I think it is the circumstances, the content, they are still very relevant to today. Clearly we still have a large population, of people who are living without homes, who are living on the street, who are struggling to provide for themselves and to get their leg up in a system that actively works to hold them down. It's a story of poverty, right, and trying to get out of poverty. And it often, the more you try to claw your way out, the deeper you get. It's just very difficult to get out of it. And so I'm sure in terms of staging and in terms of, then versus now, that there are some new things, right, that a director can allude to and that actors can find connections to. But I think it's still very similar.
Branching off on that, another audience question was your perspective on how have theater and art brought about a change in the way society sees people of color?
I mean, I think there's still a big shift happening. Representation of, different people is really important, right? It's really important that people see themselves on stage and in different media, on film, on TV, and know that their stories matter, right? And that their stories are worth telling. I think that's really important. as a young Black girl growing up, it was so exciting for me to see a Black female lead in a film. I didn't see them in plays much until I was older, right? I didn't really see those leads in plays, and then when I did, it was huge, and it's inspiring and it's encouraging, and so I think it's really important that there is representation across the board, right? That everyone's story gets told.
Someone wanted to know, what would you tell young playwrights who want to respectfully write diverse characters without personal experience? Perhaps a straight writer writing about LGBTQ.
Yeah, I mean, one, do your research, right? Don't write blindly. Um, Always have a dramaturg available, right? Dramaturgs are wonderful. And if you've never worked with a dramaturg, find one, um, because they will really help you craft and structure story and, hold you accountable to things that you've said you want to do. Um, and, when you don't know, ask. I do think that it is possible and it is good for writers of all backgrounds to write characters of different backgrounds. I don't think that anyone should be pigeonholed into only writing, from their demographic, right? Because that would be boring. But we do need to make sure that we're doing it responsibly and respectfully, and that there's an authenticity to those characters, right? So make sure you're doing your research.
Speaking of
And
research,
ask.
I think, what was that?
I just said ask if you don't know. Yeah, just ask.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about research, I want to key in on this a bit because it stood out to our students when they were researching your background that theater isn't all done by feel. As a director, you put a lot of time and research into it. Can you tell us a bit more about your process and the research that goes into creating these shows?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for every show, right? Depending on the needs of that particular story and that production. For Intimate Apparel, this was a period piece, and I had to learn and do my research about the time period, and about what it was to be a Black woman living in 1905 Manhattan, but also what it was to be an Orthodox Jewish man living in 1905 Manhattan. And so I have to understand each of those characters, and where they're coming from and what their circumstances are in that frame. So it's a good amount of work, right, to do that. But I don't do it, in a vacuum. I have a dramaturg. I have other designers and artists who are also doing that work, and we bring everything together, and teach each other, as we learn about the play. And then for plays that are not set in, the past, right? If they're set right now, there's some more access, but I can't assume that I know everything about that world and those characters. So there's still research to be done. And that's just based on what's in the play, what the content is. But my process starts with some research. It also starts with just some processing of my own feelings and thoughts about the content of the play and what it brings up for me and what resonates. And then it's about bringing in those other voices, the designers that I'm working with and collaborating.
Going back to Intimate Apparel, we did get a great question about that. They were curious that with that show, there's that connection to the Say Her Name, Say His Name campaigns. And America knows some of the names of Black victims from police. If you could tell the story of someone from our time, who would you like to take their story up?
If we're specifically talking about victims, of police violence, I don't think I would choose one. I think there are too many of those stories, and one is not more worthy than another. Um, so if I were to take up that, it would be about telling as many as I could, right? Or telling a story that sort of incorporated all of them. There's a wonderful play called Kill Move Paradise by James Imes, which kind of does this already. And it's specifically focused on Black men. But he has found a way to do that, right? Where he's speaking to all of those victims. He's speaking about all of those victims, but using characters that are representative. Yeah, so I don't know if I could choose one.
Mm-hmm. That is tough. We had several community members who were interested to get your thoughts on Hamilton and its wild success. You touched on this a bit ago. The show was kind of unique because it featured actors of color playing historical figures who were white. What kind of impact do you think that those casting choices have on audience members, and specifically for audience members of color?
I mean, Hamilton, I only just recently saw it when it, came to streaming. I didn't get
I'm
to see it when it was live.
surprised.
Yeah. But it, certainly had a huge impact, right? To see those stories be told with, BIPOC bodies was surprising. It was inventive, and it was new, right? Um, but for me personally, I want to see the stories of BIPOC historical figures told by BIPOC artists, right? I think Hamilton is great, but I think there are so many of those stories that are not being told, and should be told, right, with those same bodies. Um, so I'm excited to see where the impact of Hamilton takes us next, because I think that's what's next.
A lot of movies and TV shows that we consume today include social messages within the plot or characters. And sometimes they get criticism for being too heavy handed or making those messages feel forced. How do you think a writer or director can approach important societal issues that are difficult to talk about? Do you have any advice?
Hmm. I won't say I have advice for writers, because I think it's really difficult as a writer, especially to be clear about what the message is without it feeling heavy-handed. As a director, uh, I like to be direct, but I also, um, I think subtlety is important, right? And I think uh, finding ways to surprise the audience and to shift their perspective in subtle ways where the audience doesn't even realize it's happening. And then, there's a reveal or a revelation of like, oh, now I'm seeing something that I didn't notice was there before. And I think that's the best way to really relay those messages without it feeling like, here's the lesson you have to learn. Because it's more than about a lesson you have to learn. It's about, how do you experience someone else's story, and how do you just understand a different, a different way of looking at something. And so that's what I'm always trying to get audiences to do. Just look at something, turn it just a little bit, and how does it change?
That brings us to another great student question. In past interviews, you've talked about the idea of reconfiguring our thought process when it comes to racism, asking ourselves not if we are racist, but how are we racist? Do you have any personal perspective or advice on how we can do this better on an individual level?
Yeah, I mean, we need to not make assumptions about ourselves and about our communities. Everyone wants to assume that uh, that they are not racist or that they are not implicated in injustices. But, we all in this society play a part in these injustices, whether it's by, turning and looking the other way when things are happening, or, allowing microaggressions to slide in the workplace, not calling things out when we see them, not doing the deep self-investigation that we need to do to think about, when have I done these things? Have I done these things? Because when we look close enough, more often than not, we realize that, like, oh, if I really think about it, there are times when I have, crossed the street because a certain person of a certain demographic was walking towards me, or, tried to close the elevator door because someone was about to come in, and those things that are often unconscious, right? Because they're so ingrained in us. We have learned as a society to fear what is other, what is different. And it takes work to unlearn that. And we all need to do that work. So it really is just about asking the question, right? Not am I racist, but how am I? How am I a part of this system of oppression? And how can I work to undo it in myself?
And this is probably where storytelling can be so powerful, to start to introduce those concepts in the theater. So this brings us to another audience question. They were curious about, with plays like In the Blood, as a director, would you make additional adaptations to make it more effective to a modern audience, convey new ideas?
Adapting the play?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think that's, I don't think that it needs to be adapted. I think it, the themes, the content of this play in particular are far-reaching, and have been around for a long time, and from what I can tell, are not going anywhere. Right? Systems of oppression, systems that discriminate, subjugate, that hold people down and hold people back. The ways in which different people take advantage of others or look down on others who they feel are less than them. These are things that are happening and unfortunately will continue to happen. I don't think the play needs to be adapted for a modern audience to understand those themes and to feel them. There are plays, people adapt Shakespeare, they adapt classical works to make them more modern. I just had my acting class at UIC. I had them watch Much Ado About Nothing, which was a production of Much Ado About Nothing that was done with an all-Black cast, and it was done very modern. It was set in 2019. So that I think is useful, right, with texts that are that old. But something as recent as In the Blood, I don't think needs adaptation.
Plenty of people have been curious about how coronavirus has impacted the theater world, and talk to us about some of the changes for companies. How have you been able to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, lots of companies have not been able to keep going. And that's a really sad reality, is that there will be a lot of companies that have to close. There will be a lot of companies that are unable to produce anything in this moment. But what I'm seeing, is that there are plenty of companies who are being inventive and innovative and thinking about, okay, what can theater be in this moment, right? And how can theater be applied, which I think is the really great question to be asking, right? What is the purpose and use for theater in this moment? How can we bring communities together, and how can we create connection, which is the beautiful thing that theater does, in a moment where, we are not allowed to connect in the ways that we are used to or that we would like to. So, Zoom readings, new play development is great. That's happening right now at a lot of theaters. Cultivating the work of young artists so that when we do come out of this moment, there's all of this beautiful new work to dive into. And also, responding to our current moment, in all of its complexities. I think I've seen a lot of that happening as well. And I've been involved in a few projects that are directly, using performance and music and choreography, on this screen, right? To really think about and start conversations about what's happening in our world.
What has been the most encouraging thing you have seen the theater world do in this moment?
I think it's just that, right? Is not give up. It's to keep going and to continue to try to find connection with communities and with artist to artist. I'm constantly being asked to be a part of, this reading or this project. And so it's very clear to me that, theater will not be stopped, right? Like we will prevail. We will go on after this. And my hope is that we go on with renewed energy and new perspective and a new way of thinking about what theater can do, right? Other than just entertain. It can heal and it can empower and it can provide solutions. It can do so much if we just expand, our thinking about it.
If you could speak directly to the young artist who might be watching, people that might be considering a career in directing or acting or other art forms, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, you can do it. It's not impossible. You can make a living doing this. But just know why you're doing it. If you're doing it for fame and fortune, you might want to consider a different career path. There are very few people in the theater world that reach the level of fame and fortune, right? So if that's why you're doing it, maybe pick something else. But if you are doing it because you want to feel that energy that I was talking about, and you want to contribute to your community and to society with art, I say go for it. And I think that's the most important thing, is knowing why you're doing it. And that will drive you through a career.
We've covered almost all of our audience questions. So we have to ask you, is there anything that we have not talked about yet this evening that you would like to share with the Purdue audience?
I don't know. I think we covered a lot. We will be having a public performance, the class that I'm teaching / directing. There will be a public performance of the work that we're doing in there. And so someone will give the link when that's available. And I hope that people come and watch the work of these students, because they're really invested and they're thinking really deeply about these characters and this content. And I think it'll be really interesting to watch.
Well, thank you for your time here, and a huge thank you to the Purdue Theater Department for making this evening possible. As Tasia mentioned, we will be sharing the links to performance information, and this video will be available on the Purdue Honors College YouTube channel.